frisör. Sono fastivaraco.
Today we are talking about how to abuse, how to fight tax abuses. Perhaps only some very few remarks from out of the side of the view of the European President of Taxpayers. The best situation is if you don't have taxes. Like in the European Union, we don't have taxes, we don't have debts. That's a very good situation, but it's only this situation because we have to make unanimous decisions about taxes, and Micheal knows it because he's leading our office in Brussels. Every year we have to fight new ideas of European taxes, which should be additional to the national taxes, but we only need one country in Europe to fight it, and we always find one or two or three countries who are fighting against additional taxes in Europe. So that's the best abuse of the best fight of abuses, not to have taxes. The next, when I tell it out of the view of our work in the last 30 years, the best fight against it is to have low taxes. If you have low taxes, people want to pay it. We have some good examples. We were fighting for the flat tax systems in Estonia and in Slovakia and other countries, together with Richard Feder from the Ohio University, who is researching in taxation and growth. And these countries who have the flat taxes in Europe they are moving very fast. Also, even if they were in the communist area before, they are moving very fast. And one very good example for how low taxes are working is the tax reform in Russia. Putin, who was also advised by Richard Feder, who before advised Ronald Reagan with the American tax reform. And Putin reduced taxes in the year 2002 from 35% to 13%, and in 2004 he had already 46% more of tax income with 13% than he had before with the 35%. That's a very interesting thing, and so you see, low taxation is the best for against tax abuses. And our Taxpayers Association, we always tell the taxes which some people don't pay have to be paid by other people. So we are for taxation, but we are heavily against high level of taxation. And as a German, the last remark: when the American tax reform is working now, and Italy will make its changes in taxation, and Belgium and other European countries, Germany will be the second after Japan, the third after Malta and Japan. Germany will have the second highest taxes for entrepreneur in the world, and that's a very bad situation which we have to handle, and we have to fight very hard in Germany to bring taxes down. Now who is starting? Micheal, are you starting?
Well, good morning. I think that's really hard of tax fighters. Those who are able to sit here 9 o'clock in the morning. That's fine. I only have to add some things to what Rolf said. So tax abuse is, for us, as with the Taxpayers movement, you have seen the Black Book when we publish the waste of public money. It's also harmful to society as tax abuse, and we think both should be punished. So if we talk about tax abuse, we should also talk on how to fight for less waste of tax money. So I think that's, for us, always very important, because we have not a revenue problem in Germany, we have an expenditure problem, and that's also important to know. And what do you want, and what do you have to finance with taxes? So that's important. And what Rolf said, if you have a fair system, understandable system, not the system what we have in Germany, with low taxes and not too many exemptions. You cannot deduct if you take a flat tax with 10% as in Bulgaria. It's a very simple system. Everybody has to pay 10%, and the minimum of existence is tax-free, so everybody should and can contribute. We had years ago the problem when Schröder was running for to be chancellor. We had a very good constitutional court, Professor Kirchhoff. He made a very good proposal for a fair and simple tax system. But then he was stopped by one press conference finally where Schröder said, the professor from Heidelberg, and he want to tax a millionaire as a nurse, 20-25%. And so nobody assisted him, and Merkel, she let him fall. He was really a good, not only was a good constitutional judge, he prepared a complete new tax code, a fair tax code. But it was not possible, and that's the question. Is it fair or unfair if a millionaire is paying 250,000 euro and the nurse is paying 25,000 euro? For sure, normally. So it's a question. In Germany, a flat tax is existing for corporate income tax and value-added tax, and it's a fair system. But if it comes to the income tax, we have a linear progressive system. We cannot change it because most people think that it's not fair to have a flat tax. So I think that's important to have low tax rates, understandable taxes, and people should know that the money is spent efficient. And as long as it's not spent efficient, like we show every year, and that's, by the way, also the highest competence our members and society thinks about the Taxpayers Association. It's not to fight for lower taxes, it's to fight the waste of public money. And we could also discuss more consumption taxation, the system. Now we have corporate income tax, and a value-added tax. For instance, in Germany, it could also be discussed to have more or only consumption tax, what we were discussing yesterday and the day before yesterday. No more corporate income tax. If you look at the revenues for the corporates, what we have in Germany, so we can change the system for sure, because the revenues out of the corporate income tax, the amount is not too high. So let me end. Fair system with low tax rates, but I think the state is happy to have a complex system, because most of the taxpayers are not able to optimize the tax payment, the tax declaration, and we pay every year more. The state has not a revenue problem, he has an expenditure problem. And that's from my side the most important topic, not only to look on low tax rates, also to fight the waste of public money.
Thank you, Michael. Only in addition to this, in Germany, 15 years ago, you had to earn 19 times more than the median income to pay the highest tax rate. Today, you have to. It's 1.3%. If you earn 1.3% more than the median income, you pay already the highest tax rate. So and 50% of the population don't pay corporate taxes and income tax, and so they are not interested in taxes. They are even not interested if they are growing or if they are going down, because they don't pay. But now we have to leave this room because our micros are in the other room. Please take your luggage. We move to the next room.
And we had a goal that this issue about tax, petrol tax or gas taxes, should be on the agenda, and that was the goal of the campaign, and we did that and much more. To get this campaign going, we had put up 3 proposals for the campaign for people to sign on, and we could of course have said, get rid of the tax or make the tax half of it or something like that, but we decided to do something in Swedish we call lagom. You know that word, perhaps. It's sort of moderate proposal. So we had 3 proposals. First, lower the tax. That could be, someone could think, take it away totally, and someone could say perhaps don't make a tax hike. The second proposal, get rid of the VAT on the gas tax. In Sweden, we have a system where we put VAT on the taxes, and I think a lot of people think that's just doesn't. It's not fair. It's like you have a tax, and then you should have a tax on the tax. So I think a lot of people are not really always considered, so like us, don't like taxes. They thought that this was really not a fair proposal, so they thought that also that was got public attention. And the third proposal to sign was that the VAT on gas should be the same level as on public transport, on mass transit. And in Sweden, the normal rate is 25% on VAT, and on public transport is 6%. So that was our sort of moderate lagom proposal to sign, and we put up this website. And then the second thing was who should be the messenger for this? Should we put up some sort of campaign? Should a taxpayer be, or some other group be the messenger of this? But we did the thing that we found a man called Kenneth. It's probably seen to the right at the page there. He's sort of a regular guy. He's very good at speaking. He was actually my first boss, so trained me a lot in this. But he's retired since many years. But he can talk with media if it was needed. But he also sort of regular guy that's tired of taxes and so on. So we started this, and this was, as I said before, social media. But it got viral directly. All the big newspapers and magazines, they made big articles about this, and people signed this, and they sent emails to their friends to sign it. So it got so much attention, so we had to switch servers for the web hosting because the servers went down, and all the names just from the beginning we send thank you mail to all who signed this petition, but it was impossible. So we had like 3-4 people sitting on just cleaning the list, because some people duplicated their name. Just some perhaps if they were strong supporters, but some just they didn't understand how to do it and so on. So we had people cleaning the list, take away duplicate and other things, and still we got, if you can see, 1.8 million signatories to these proposals, and we got into and Sweden at that time had about 9.5 million inhabitants. We have 10 million today. That's another story. So I think this was really a good campaign at that time. And was it? I can see it. So we released it at that time through traditional media, but the media accepted it, and I think if and we tried several traditional campaign methods. We also sort of meta message. We talked about the campaign. We later released a book about the campaign with the letters coming in from regular people saying, oh, I support your campaign because of this and this and this, or I live very somewhere in the countryside and I have to drive every day this and this. How big problem is the petrol tax and so on. So we made a book about this. And what were the results? We succeeded, of course, with our goal with being a part of the election campaign. We got 1.8 million signatures, and we also had 10.5 million visitors to this website, and we had several hundreds of articles about this. But the effect on politics was that we stopped tax hikes on gas. It's not. I think even green politicians in Sweden can't talk about higher gas taxes. They have to talk about something. They have to do their message in another way. So we had tax hikes on gas, but they sort of stealth tax. They have do some tricks with index of tax increases and so on related to inflation and so on. But that it's sort of not possible to talk about tax hikes on gas anymore in Sweden. And now, latest month, it's a little bit more talk due to the discussion on climate change and so on. But all politicians then always say, if we have higher taxes on gas, it must be made in a way so we can keep people living on the countryside excluded from this. And this is, of course, a trick, because most people, almost every Swedish citizen is dependent on their car, even people living in cities. So that's a trick. So now we're thinking out how to do that part of it. But still, 10 years later, this campaign still has a big impact on Swedish politics. So why did we succeed in this? I think, first of all, I'm wrapping up now. 3 points. Strong support for the case. We have a simple and moderate lagom proposal that was inclusive to many groups. And we also had a messenger that people could relate to. It was like it was a regular guy, so it was not organization. Later on we got support from organizations to this petition, a lot of organizations, but it was a regular guy. So the answer to my question is yes. And last thing before I end. Imagine what could be done today with social media. You can look at the Swedish schoolgirl Greta Thunberg. She's just, if you do something like that on tax issues, today it could be much easier to do things like that. But you have to have the right person, you have to have the right case, and you have to think about the sort of lagom message for a campaign like this. Then we could do almost everything. Thank you.
Well, are we switching to All right, I want to talk about how to promote good tax policy. And I'm going to make the argument that politicians have no interest in good tax policy because that doesn't gain them more votes. It's always in their interest to demonize the top 5%, the top 10%, the top 1%. So how do we somehow overcome that institutional bias in the political class for more taxes? And I would argue that it's if governments have to compete with each other. We know competition works in the private sector. Gas stations would rip us off if we had no choices. Grocery stores would rip us off. Banks would rip us off. Competition is the consumer's best friend because if businesses know that people can shop someplace else, all of a sudden they have to cater to us instead of the other way around. And the simple premise of tax competition is that the same lesson should apply to governments. And the good news is in the modern era, that has been happening. Here's a chart from the Commerce Department in the United States. It shows cross-border mobility of capital just into the United States from overseas. And you can see, starting in the 1970s, there's been an explosion in inbound investment. And this is just a proxy. There's been a giant increase in cross-border mobility all around the world. And what does this mean? It means that taxpayers can move their money out of the grasp of greedy politicians. At least they traditionally did. And during this era of capital mobility and tax competition, we saw big reductions in tax rates. It used to be that the top income tax rate in developed countries was between 67 and 68%. It dropped down close to 40%. It used to be the average corporate tax rate was 48%. Now it's down to actually less than 24%. We've also seen death taxes and wealth taxes eliminated. We've seen reductions in the double taxation of saving and investment, and we've even seen a number of flat tax jurisdictions. Now, have all these changes occurred because people were reading my policy papers? Were they reading the Tax Foundation or other think tanks? No. I mean, I hope they were doing those things, but I think these changes occurred mostly because politicians were afraid. They were afraid that the money was escaping, the tax base was escaping. That's the whole premise of tax competition. Force politicians to do the right thing even though they don't want to. And why are they doing the right thing? One reason. They're afraid that the geese with the golden eggs are flying away. And if you're a politician, that's the worst possible thing in the world. Now think about what this means for the principles of good tax policy. What type of tax rates do we want? Well, as Michael already mentioned, we want low tax rates. If you have a 0 or a 20% marginal tax rate, you're probably going to be productive. But if you have a 50 or 100% tax rate, of course you're not going to work and be productive. Well, here's the genius and the benefit of tax competition. Politicians want to be at the bottom of that slide. But with tax competition, they're forced to be at the top of the slide. They can't be greedy because they know that if the taxpayer moves or the taxpayer's money moves, then it doesn't matter if they have a 70% or 80% rate. 70 or 80% is zero. And that's what's great about tax competition. And of course, this is very good from a supply side microeconomic principle of good tax policy. Politicians understand that high taxes discourage smoking. We want to force them to realize that high taxes discourage working and saving and investing. Speaking of saving and investing, this flow chart, you won't be able to read it probably, but on the left side it shows what happens if you consume your after-tax income, and the right side shows what happens if you save and invest your after-tax income. You get taxed over and over again because politicians say, oh, rich people have saving and investing, so let's impose corporate taxation, double taxation of dividends, capital gains taxes, death taxes, wealth taxes. So let's think about this same principle. Politicians want to be on the right side if they don't have any constraints, if they think taxpayers are captive. But in a world of tax competition, they're forced to be on the left side of the flow chart. And again, let's think about what this means from the principle of good tax policy. You can't show this flow chart to a politician. It's too complicated. But sometimes I give them the simple example. Imagine if they ran an apple orchard. That's kind of simple, a tree, apples. Even a politician can grasp the underlying economics of how an apple orchard works. And I tell them, after you make the big investment and take the risks and everything, and you somehow get a crop of apples, how do you harvest the apples? Do you pick them from the tree or do you chop down the tree? Well, even a politician understands if you chop down the tree, it might be easier to pick up the apples, but you won't have apples next year. Apples are the income, the tree is the capital. We don't want politicians to be double and triple and quadruple taxing, saving and investing. That's the good news. Tax competition for several decades was forcing tax rates down, was forcing politicians to do the right thing even though they don't want to. But here's the bad news. Politicians figured out, let's replace tax competition with tax cartelization. Working through the OECD, the European Commission, and for that matter, other bureaucracies, they have been trying to create captive customers, sort of like a gas station running other gas stations out of business and then ripping you off with high prices. And unfortunately, in the last 10 years, they've been winning. Human rights laws on financial privacy have been eviscerated, extraterritorial tax laws have expanded, and you have this OECD multilateral convention on mutual administrative assistance in tax matters. And what does that do? It in effect requires automatic collection and sharing of information, even with some of the world's most dodgy and corrupt governments. But from an economic perspective, why this matters? Because politicians now think, even if the geese with the golden eggs fly away, our tax code can follow them around the world. And that's why in the last 10 years, tax rates have been creeping upward again. So we're in very, very bad situation. I'll close just by showing a couple of quotes. Lord Acton, the distribution of power among several states is the best check on democracy, because what is democracy? Two wolves and a sheep voting what to have for lunch. You want the sheep to be able to escape, and that's what jurisdictional competition does. And then Max Weber, I'll just read the last part of the quote. The separate states had to compete for mobile capital. Europe became rich in part because of jurisdictional competition. Now, I also have all sorts of quotes from Nobel Prize winners. I'm not going to read them out because I want to keep on time. We have a German moderator, and they're very strict. But, Vernon Smith, Edward Prescott, Edmund Phelps. Well, Bavarians are more chill. They're more relaxed about things, right?
Bavarians are like the Austrian.
We have Douglas North. We have Friedrich Hayek. And I guess I'll close with this simple observation. I'm not in favor of tax evasion. I believe in the rule of law. But I want a tax system that allows growth. And if you want both tax compliance and economic prosperity, you want to have a low tax rate, no double taxation, and a territorial tax system. With that kind of regime, like a Hall-Rabushka flat tax, it doesn't matter whether your bank account's in Panama City, Florida, or Panama City, Panama, Geneva, Illinois, or Geneva, Switzerland. In other words, good tax policy is consistent with growth and with tax compliance. And even Adam Smith recognized this many, many years ago. Thank you very much.
A very famous talk show host in America, a comedian, once said, you never want to follow a child act or an animal act, or Dan Mitchell. When you think of taxpayer abuse, what is it that comes to mind? What first comes to mind to me are those medieval torture devices that I saw at the fortress yesterday, or perhaps even a scene like this from the time of the pharaohs. This is a picture that I took right outside the pyramids of Giza in one of the ruins, and this is the tax collectors, the pharaoh's tax collectors, extracting the last shekels from these poor workers that were building the pyramids. That's sort of the physical aspect of tax abuse that I think most of us think about. But I think that there's a different type of tax abuse. It's more subtle. It's the impact that taxes have on our liberty and free markets. Taxes shape our lives, our choices, our professions, where we live, the products we buy, and the foods that we eat. And there are all kinds of cases like this, unintended or unforeseen consequences. And politicians, of course, like to use taxes in order to shape our lives. There are these things called Pigovian taxes, after the English economist Albert Arthur Pijou, who wanted to use taxes to stop us from harming others through things like smog or pollution or smoking or that sort of thing. And then we have these things called Sumerian taxes. That's my new term, after the Harvard economist Larry Summers, who wants to use taxes to keep you from harming yourself. Things like soda taxes and sweets taxes and things like that. So how do we fight taxes and tax abuse? Well, we could put on a yellow vest and go storming down to the Champs-Élysées. We could storm the barracks or the barricades there in Barcelona. We could move to Switzerland, perhaps even, or move to Hong Kong where they have low taxes. Or we could use stories and humor to fight tax abuse by showing the absurdly stupid ways that taxes harm liberty and the free market. And it starts with simple things like the choices of our sweets. Now, what's the difference between these two products? They're both sweet. They're both candy. Well, one of these is taxed and one is taxed and the other isn't. Most countries and most states in the United States zero rate taxes on food. Twix bars are considered food because they have flour in them in that little cookie. So they are zero rated, whereas the other thing is taxed because it is considered candy. Now, how about children's clothing, which is zero rated in the UK? So this reporter, she's a reporter for The Guardian, I think, went out to see if she could save money, both on value-added taxes but also on clothing, by shopping for teen clothing. So here on the left is the adult clothing, which cost her a couple of €100. But then she saved €100 by shopping for teen clothing because the clothing is zero rated up to like age 16. She happens to be rather petite, so she fit into her teenager's clothes, saved both on the euro and on her clothing. Now, what about these cars? Both are luxury vehicles. One is taxed. One gets a tax subsidy because it's an electric car. The Tesla. Elon Musk is making billions of dollars by selling us these things at taxpayer subsidies. Meanwhile, if you go out and buy a fine-made German Mercedes-Benz, you pay full freight. What about this ridiculous car? This is my favorite. Where's John? Oh, O'Connell's not here. I was going to say, does this look like a motorcycle? No, it's the Reliant Robin, which in England back in the day motorcycles were taxed at a different rate than four-wheeled automobiles. So this very clever company came up with this tricycle-looking automobile, and thus working class people, especially in the north and the mining areas, bought these. They were very economical because you paid a lower tax. Now they had this little problem, which occasionally they kind of fell over, but that can happen to anybody. Now, entire cultures have been changed because of tax policy. How many people were in Copenhagen last year for the Atlas event? Notice how many people are riding bicycles throughout Copenhagen. Very environmentally friendly, don't you think? Well, they've been taxed off the roads because of the high taxes on automobiles. Millions of people in Denmark ride bicycles everywhere because they can't afford cars. The only way you can afford a car is to move over with Susanna and Anders over in Sweden, where you buy a car and then commute into Copenhagen. Now, what about the things that we live in, the places we live in? Now, taxes have an impact on that as well, often to the good, because we have very clever architects. And so in Charleston, South Carolina, where they taxed you on the number of windows you had facing the street, people put the windows on the side of the house, along with their porch, and they had this beautiful design. It's a lovely place.
Like mezzanine.
Yeah, Paris, France. How many of us have been there? You notice those beautiful roofs on the top of all the buildings? Those are mansard roofs. Those came into existence because a very clever architect named Mansard designed these to avoid the high taxes on the number of floors that you had below the roof line. And so he put this rather sloped roof on the top of the building to make essentially the attic into a tax-free living space. Then over on the far right-hand side is Amsterdam, in which you were taxed on the frontage that you had to your canals. And so what did the architects do? They built it up and narrow and all the way back. Now, they're a little cramped, but very architecturally appealing. Now, how many of you, sometimes taxes have a bad effect on architecture as well. How many of you have seen these kind of buildings? If you've traveled through Greece or Yugoslavia, I was just in Egypt this year, and you see rebar sticking out of the top of houses. Ridiculous, right? Well, this is all because of taxes in large part, because it looks like an unfinished building, in which pay either zero or less of a tax than a finished building. And so people leave it like this and they pay lower property taxes. Or you have a situation like this. What's the difference there if you can see it? The bricks are different size. Why? Because England once put in place a tax on the size of bricks. What did brick makers do? Build bigger bricks. And so you can actually date buildings in their age by the size of the bricks. How about on the right-hand side, where you've got all the, speaking of bricks, I don't know what size they are, but you have windows that have been bricked in. Again, window taxes. We see those kind of effects all over the globe. The chicken tax. Once upon a time, during the 1960s, you Europeans put a high tariff on imported chickens from America. So what did America do? They responded by putting a tariff on delivery vans, specifically targeting Volkswagen, I think, and their delivery vans. Well, on the right-hand side, you see a Ford delivery van, which is made currently in Spain. Imported to the United States with fake seats in the back.
Yes, that is something.
It gets off the boat. They put it into a warehouse. Guys strip out the seats, put in new carpeting, finish off all the windows, and voila, you have a delivery van and not a passenger vehicle. Passenger vehicles have a tariff of 2.5%. This would have had a tariff of 25% had it been declared a actual delivery vehicle. Actually, it's really funny because the U.S. government is now suing Ford over this kind of design. They want their taxes. And of course, speaking of environmental taxes, we have big tax subsidies for things like windmills, which are otherwise unaffordable. I know we're getting there. And then we've got tariffs. Speaking of tariffs,
10 minutes for discussion.
Oh, I know. Okay, two more slides. We got tariffs, which are driving Harley Davidson to come to Europe and create jobs. You want to make $4 million quick? Smuggle cigarettes. These fine young gentlemen were arrested taking smuggled cigarettes into New York City, where they could have made $4 million. I am always embarrassed to kind of go into the Picasso Museum in Paris. I love Picasso, but that was created because of tax policy. After Picasso died, the family was facing millions of euros worth of higher taxes through the estate tax bill, and so the finance minister in France declared that a tax obligation could be settled by the gift of artwork to the state. Thus, the creation of the Picasso Museum. You say, what does this have all to do with the kind of policies we're dealing with today? Well, these all teach us, say we can apply all of these lessons to the EU digital tax. It'll have unintended consequences. It'll harm consumers. It'll harm innovation, and so forth. All of the lessons of history and taxation give us a way of analyzing current tax policy, and I think give us humorous ways of showing politicians the error of their ways. The unfortunate thing at the end here that I think is sadly true, politicians will never be held accountable for these effects. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott. You see how much intelligence people spend for avoiding taxes. That's quite interesting, and but we also learned that the lower the taxes are, the easier or less the less avoidance of taxes is coming with lower taxes. So we must fight for lower taxes, and sometimes, like with the inheritance tax, we have to fight for no tax. Then you have to avoid it. So now questions from you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for all your presentations. One question for Anders and one short comment. First, the comment, thanks to you, Daniel, I found out that OECD employees, they don't pay income tax. So I always, once a month at least, I tweet to OECD tax asking them if they pay taxes or not, if they are hypocrites, and we should all do that. Yeah. They never replied to me yet, but I'm not losing hope.
That's actually a very good idea.
Yeah?
Yeah. We all did it. With the Taxpayers organization, with the European, with all those organizations. Same day, tweet by everybody.
And don't forget the IMF, the UN, and all the other parasitical bureaucracies.
Who are always proposing higher taxes.
Yeah.
That's very good.
Okay.
But
Other questions?
Federico?
Yes, for Anders, very quickly. Anders, what do you think is a good candidate to launch a campaign like the one you described? That you said that, you know what, with the tools that we have now, what should be the aim this time?
I'm not really sure what could be the low, perhaps there's lowest hanging fruit, the easiest target. That's one thing. And on the other side, we should think about what would be perhaps most important related to what we discussed in this panel. I think the most important issue today, I think, is exit taxes. Taxes that actually is the politicians wants to keep us in their territory. So I think for Europeans it's really important to look into exit taxes and fight, if there is exit taxes, fight them, or there are proposals, fight them, because that's perhaps the ultimate threat to politics. We can reach our voices, but exit, that's the perhaps.
Okay. Can I ask you, Anders, under the free movement of labor rules in Europe, can they actually put in very steep exit taxes?
They have, in several countries, have different schemes of the exit taxes for instance, capital gains if you sell a company or something like that. Yeah.
But I think those exit taxes are only addressed to the upper 30% or 20, no, not even 30. It's probably the upper 15% who are as flexible and as mobile. I would actually add to what Federico just said, the lowest hanging fruit. If we look at the Yellow Vests in France, I mean, those guys went to the streets because of the energy taxation, the gasoline taxation. And this is what the man on the street understands, because this is what he feels every day.
And that's what we did in Sweden. So I think it works, and I think it should. The French movement could be transformed into something like that. Yeah, better.
The issue, I think, is just the translation, because everybody thinks, okay, I have to pay. They don't even understand that they pay taxes on gasoline. They don't understand it. At least the Austrians don't. They just take it and pay it.
Michael has a question.
I don't know if you have the same green movement as we have in Germany and then now also in Europe. So if we would fight for lower taxes, we have no majority. So if we would say energy or whatever, so how can we convince? I hear inside all these tax fighters, we strongly know about the effect of low taxes, that it's a good thing. But how to convince majority of people, for instance, in Austria and Germany, that's a problem. So even if it's inheritance tax, say they want to implement a wealth tax, now in Germany there's a big discussion, the rich should contribute more. And how can we convince these people? Yeah, that's the question.
I think if you looked at the Swedish case, we used this lagom proposal. Everyone could relate it. Is it fair to pay VAT on a tax? Used like this care and fairness argument that relates to more. I think the Scots presentation was excellent when showing examples of, is this fair to have this tax on that or that tax on that? And you can see perhaps why should rich people drive Teslas with low taxes and regular people have to pay this amount of taxes? Yeah.
There's a question here.
I have actually a suggestion, and one of the things that wasn't brought up by people on the panel, but I'd really like your views on that, and that's to not make taxes subtle, to make them really obvious. I think one of the things that we see again and again, and there's a French finance minister whose name has now escaped me, who said that the idea is to pluck the goose with as little hissing as possible. Our goal has to be to make as much hissing as possible, because the hissing is the thing that's going to lower the tax. Years ago, I stood for Parliament, when they always ask you when you're standing for Parliament, what law do you want to bring in if you become an MP? And you're not allowed to have a revenue law. You're not allowed to change taxes. And so I'm not going to change tax. My law is going to be every petrol pump has to have a little label on it. And the label tells you how much of the cost is tax. I'm not telling you to lower taxes, I'm just making the tax obvious. In the UK a few years ago, George Osborne, who was not in fact a terribly good tax-cutting chancellor at all, but he did have the idea of giving every single individual in the UK an annual statement of how much tax you've paid.
Oh, that's right.
It will not surprise you to know the civil service thought this was extraordinarily difficult, dragged their feet like crazy, then the second he left Downing Street, it was number 11, not number 10, they eliminated it. It was far too bureaucratic. It was too difficult because we can't possibly do this thing. I mean, obviously, if it was a new tax, it would have been easy and permanently as part of our law, but it was dropped. I think I got one, maybe two of these things. But we need to make tax
that's
really,
right.
really
That's right.
obvious.
We do it in our Taxpayers Association in Germany. We tell you the price is 100%, 60% is taxes. So a very simple movement. Now I saw you. Now, please.
After Dan's presentation, when we were discussing about privacy, about the financial privacy issues, the horrible damage that the OECD, for instance, has been doing over the past 20 or 30 years. A few weeks ago, I remember the far left in Spain saying that cash money is the ultimate tax haven. So they are already pushing for what a few countries are already threatening us to do, which is to get rid of cash money. And I think that we taxpayers organizations should really do something about and all the freedom movement should in fact save cash. Let's call it.
Sure. The Swiss are are in the crosshairs now because they still have a 1,000 Swiss franc note, and so the left hates that. And I wrote an entire column about how they want to get rid of cash not only so they can tax more, but also so they can impose financial repression, which is just a term for negative interest rates. Yeah. So they're going to force you as good Keynesians to spend your money, because if it's sitting in a bank someplace, they'll just take away a piece of it every single day.
I have a very short thing about that. I think it's very important also to look into there is those rankings about easy paying taxes, and I think it should not be that easy to pay taxes. It should be complicated, because then you think about it.
Complicated, painful.
No, it's painful also, and I think it's many
painful to
countries
pay taxes.
see this system where you use a web, you got the pre-printed tax declaration form.
Source, it's easy. I just didn't receive it, but if you give you the money gross, and now I charge you tax. That becomes painful.
That's one thing, but you also have this income declaration form that could be pre-printed and so on, or on the website. We do that in Sweden, and that makes the taxes even more invisible for people. It's important. Don't make it too easy to pay taxes.
Let me give a quick example of this. Back during the Bush years, I made a big effort to try to get the Bush administration to have dividend payments reflect the fact that there was already a 35% at the time corporate tax on it. Now, it wouldn't have done anything other than just a little notice, this income was already taxed. You would think that since the Bush administration wanted to reduce double taxation of dividends, they would have realized this was a smart idea, because all these people who had fiscal illusion because they didn't realize this money had been taxed once already, but if we do that, people will think somehow we imposed a new tax, and so they rejected the idea.
Now it's your turn. Yes, and then Barbara.
I want to ask the panel from third world countries that are tax recipients of your developed countries, especially from Scandinavia, in a specific case, for example, in Guatemala, taxpayer money from Norway and Finland for decades has been used by NGOs in Guatemala that claim to be, empowering indigenous women, taking them to schools, when in fact these are Marxist organizations that use these taxes to, for example, close hydroelectrics in our country. Like they invade, they go, hydroelectrics are closed. What is the irony? That Finland and Norway are top countries in hydroelectric, and they are, concerned about ecology and green systems. And if there's no hydroelectricity, people go back to wood, which is even worse. So what would be a relevant way of showing people in developed countries that your tax money is not being used to empower indigenous girls in Guatemala to go to school, but you actually are empowering underdevelopment?
You are from Scandinavia. It's
so you're responsible.
Yeah. Actually, it's also Swedish. We have financed war in Africa with Swedish development aid. It's so terrible. I'm sorry.
My question is, do people care where the taxes end, or do they just care about how...
They don't know. They don't know.
Well, they don't know and they are ignorant, and that's the point.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to add before, because the cash issue, I think is something very serious. And thanks to the French, the 500 euro bill has been abolished, or actually, as of May 1st, we will not be able to print it anymore. It's now collected and that's it. And so keep all those 500 euro bills as long as you can.
Which only exists because it was Germany who insisted on having it.
Thank you.
Because we had a 1,000-mark bill before, which was equals 500 euros. But this 1,000-mark bill existed when you could buy for a few thousand mark a house.
Well, I just wish I could get a store owner to give me change for a 20, let alone a 500.
okay. Now we have 10:05. Is there any important question still left? No? Thank you. Thank you very much for this interesting panel.